Welcome everybody to the panel, Cyber's Past, Present, and Future, The Truth is Stranger Than Fiction. I believe this is the sixth time that we've had this panel back together, but honestly, I think I lost track somewhere around 2018. But we've got the same incredible group of panelists that we had over the last 5 or 6 years. My name is Dan Hubbard. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Lacework, a cloud security company. And let's introduce the panelists. Super excited about this year. It certainly has been an interesting journey, if you will, over 2020, but we're going to jump into the content in a sec. First off, I'd like to introduce Andy Greenberg. Andy is a writer for Wired. He's the author of Sandworm, A New Era of Cyber War and the Hunt for the Kremlin's Most Dangerous Hackers. And Andy can be reached on Twitter at @A_Greenberg. Then we've got Nicole Perlroth, who's a cybersecurity reporter at the New York Times, and our most recent author of This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends. Virtually next to Nicole, we've got Joseph Menn, most recent author of Cult of the Dead Cow, but also author of Fatal Systems Error and All the Rave, The Rise and Fall of Sean Fanning's Napster. Joseph works doing investigative stories at Reuters and can be followed at Joseph Menn. And lastly, certainly not least, we have Kevin Poulsen, who's an investigative journalist and data geek at the Wall Street Journal and author of Kingpin, and can be followed on Twitter at @KPoulsen. So let's kick off the roundtable. Let's start off with, we've been talking about this, topic for, 6+ years here. But if we step back to kind of the beginning of your journey in security, I'd love to hear from each one of you kind of how, what keeps you writing about security? I mean, certainly things have changed over the number of years you've all been involved, but let's talk about how you still stay excited about the topic itself. Andy, why don't you kick us off?
Well, I started my career at Forbes, like Nicole, actually. We worked together at Forbes for quite a few years, and I found that I wanted to get a job, and business writing was like the easiest place to get a job. Then I found that within business writing, technology was the most interesting thing to me. And within technology, all of the drama and conflict and kind of like adversarial underground stories of, I guess good guys and bad guys, black hats and white hats was in this world, was in cybersecurity, or whatever we called it back then. Like it was, there were business stories, there were technology stories, but there was real conflict, which is what produces, stories for journalists. So it was just a kind of never-ending fountain of interesting threads to pull on, and that's what I've been doing for 15+ years now. Since then,
yeah, awesome. Kevin, how about you?
The nice thing about covering security is the people you're covering are always innovating. So there's always something new and exciting to write about. Like the bad guys come up with more and more inventive things to do, and the good guys come up with their own inventive ways to try and foil them or track them down. So it's never really the same thing like one year to the next. There's always something new, and the people tend to be very interesting on both sides.
Yes, certainly a lot of interesting personalities, that's for sure. That's one of the things I love about it, actually. Nicole.
When I started covering cybersecurity at the Times, I thought, okay, maybe if I do a really good job on this cybersecurity thing, they'll let me go back to covering venture capital. And then I just never left. And just like Kevin just said, every year it's a whole new thing. Just when you think you have your arms around Chinese intellectual property theft, Snowden happened. And after Snowden, it was Sony and the hacks of Target, and then the 2016 hacks of the DNC, and the long awaited interference that didn't happen really at the end of the day in the election. And now it's SolarWinds and the hafnium thing. And it's like, you have no choice because you can't even pull your head above water long enough to think about doing something different. But I have to say, this is my 10-year anniversary at the Times, which feels insane because it's gone by so quickly. And I don't know about you guys, but I am just so exhausted on this treadmill of, this is only going to get worse. we are only going to see these attacks get more serious and come from further corners of the globe. And some days I just wake up and I have that realization that my life is only going to get harder the longer I stay with this beat. And it's a little bit overwhelming, especially, after 2020, when we've all been stuck in our homes for the last year. So I don't know how much longer I'll be covering the day-to-day news, but I don't think once you cover this for long enough, you have a sense that you can't abandon it, but maybe you can apply it to quirkier stories or that kind of thing. But I'm sure we're all pretty tired with the news cycle, particularly just over the last 6 months or so.
Yeah, for sure.
I'd agree with that. I'm totally fried. I've been doing this for 20 years, and in the beginning, one of the reasons I focused on it, in addition to the sort of the conflict stuff, and really is like a counterpoint to the silliness of the .com boom at the time in '99 when I started. It was much more real and important. But I had always been thinking about the fact that this soon enough, I was thinking about how this was going to get bigger and more important. And more vital, and that's absolutely been true. I mean, technology has become more important to everything, and within that, security and privacy issues have been really fundamental, the crux of technology for good and for ill. So it every year it gets more important, which is great for a career, but it is exhausting, and like you have to keep right. I think all of us, we have to keep raising our news threshold. So, if it doesn't involve a nation state, it better be a pretty good story, at this point. I mean, it's all the breach of the day stuff, it all looks the same.
Yeah, it almost kind of has to be a hobby and a job at the same time, or else it's damn near impossible to grok the scale of it all. So over, amongst us here, we've got, I think I counted 6 authored books amongst all of you, and 3 of you have published books since our last panel. Nicole, Andy, and Joseph, can you give us just a kind of a 1 or 2 liner about your books and give us a little plug of what they're all about? Nicole, why don't you start? It's the most recent.
So my book is about the underground exploit market and what I just described, sort of the growing spread of these capabilities to further corners of the globe where foreign governments are acquiring the skills and talent to conduct cyber attacks for their own reasons, whether it's surveillance or battlefield preparations or classic espionage. And I always have trouble answering this question because it really started out as a focused look at the underground cyber arms trade. But by the end, you can almost hear me just on deadline trying to get as much in as possible from what happened in 2020 ahead of the election. And so many things happened just in the last year that by the end, I don't know if I can really say it's a book about the underground exploit market or it's just a book about the nightmare and mess that we are in and will at one point have to untangle.
Great. Andy.
Well, my book is Sandworm, is about this hacker group called Sandworm that I started tracking in 2016. And my editors actually at the time at Wired were asking me to find the big story of cyber war. And they were thinking about the election hacking, but I went looking for what I thought was real cyber war, where hackers are actually causing, state-sponsored hackers are causing disruptive or destructive effects in the middle of a war, a kinetic war, which I found, in Ukraine, where essentially Ukraine had had a revolution, Russia had invaded, and then launched a cyber war in Ukraine where they were attacking every part of society, destroying all terabytes of data inside of banks and government agencies, and then ultimately causing the first 2 blackouts ever triggered by hackers, both in Ukraine. So I started tracking Sandworm, this group that was doing these unprecedented actual acts of cyber war. And then just as I started to write about them, as I published my first big magazine story about them, they released NotPetya in Ukraine, which was this worm, a piece of automated code that spread from Ukraine to the rest of the world, to the entire world, cost $10 billion in damage, was the worst cyber attack in history. So once that happened, I could see that there was like an arc of a story of that you could look to Ukraine to see the future of cyber war. And then the future of cyber war caught up with us and, hit us in the West as well. And I realized that there was a book to be written about that. And so the book kind of starts out as a detective story of tracking these attacks, figuring out who did it. And then it becomes a disaster story of watching NotPetya unfold across the world.
Oh, that's awesome. Joseph, Cult of the Dead Cow.
So my prior book, Fatal System Error, was depressing as hell. It was 10 years ago, and it basically said, we're screwed. The attack surface keeps growing. The geopolitics are such that there's no reason why somebody, for example, in Russia, hacking folks in the U.S. has anything to worry about, and vice versa. And all the reasons why things are going to get dramatically worse and really mess up our lives. And I didn't want to write another book that was like that said, well, we're also screwed in this way, which you haven't thought about enough before or something. I wanted to do something positive, which is much harder to do, and also sort of educate newer entrants to the field of security, and remind folks that have been in it for a while of really core questions. And so I picked the Cult of the Dead Cow because they are still around today. They go all the way back to the bulletin board days more than 30 years ago. And because one way or another, they were in every sort of major inflection point in InfoSec. So they came up with coordinated disclosure, responsible disclosure. They, did the gimmicky thing where they threw out working exploits at DEF CON, from the stage at DEF CON to the adoring throngs. The first to make sort of like a media spectacle of what they were doing with any success. They invented hacktivism, which they defined as hacking security work in service of human rights, which has come to the fore again fairly recently. And then they kind of launched the industry. I mean, they formed At Stake, a very early security boutique. And they founded Veracode, one of the first big code analysis, binary analysis firms. And then they ran somebody for president, conveniently right when I was publishing the book, which brought some attention on it. But I'm really interested in the ethical development, their moral development from teenage pranksters who didn't really have particularly strong ethics to, leveling up as the stakes rose and suddenly everybody's online. And how do you get a monopoly like Microsoft to care about security? And they had to deal with all these ethical issues, and they came out in different places. But I think that's something that has been lost now that cybersecurity is a nice, clean profession. They don't really think about the morality of the decisions that they're making all the time. And I think it's worth everybody's while to revisit that and figure out where they stand personally.
And Dan, if I could jump in and say, as a person here who doesn't have a book to promote right now, all three of these books are just outstanding, and it's an embarrassment of riches that we're able to have like three books of this caliber, all covering completely different aspects of the same cybersecurity beat.
Well, I reread Kingpin in preparation for this, and it is, I should say, Kevin's book, Kingpin, is a wonderful narrative. It's like the kind of tight and gripping single character focused narrative that I've always wanted to find in a cybersecurity story. And I hope people are still buying it and reading it.
It's really good.
Yeah. I mean, not in droves, since for many, many, many years, but yeah, people are still buying it. And so it's always a pleasant surprise to, get a little residual check or something.
It is hard to find one character.
It's a good segue.
I was just going to say, it is hard to find one character because the stories are so diffuse and complicated, and so I mean that's a real achievement to be able to tell it all through one person. Makes it's so much easier on the reader if you can do that.
Well, actually, I mean, you had the one character who you had, it seemed like, complete access to, like wonderful personal drama of Max Vision's life, but then also the FBI agent tracking him and like his his kind of accomplice and his accomplice's mistresses and things. It was just wonderful access. And you also like hid your access, I thought, very well, just to tell the story straight. It was really well done.
Thank you. I think that's the reason I have not written another book is nobody like Max has really popped up, and I don't know how to reproduce it. So it's really, I'm really just kind of waiting for him now that he's out of jail.
I remember when I first thought about doing a book and I met with some publishers. They said, you need a donkey, find your donkey, the person who's going to carry your narrative all the way through. And I never found my donkey. And that meant that at times I had to use those words that have been beaten out of us at the New York Times, I and me, to kind of take the reader by the hand. But it was painful and awkward. And I too really envy that you clearly found the perfect donkey. So you said he's about to get out of jail.
He's out, actually. Yeah. They tacked on a little bit of time because he staged a caper while in jail involving a helicopter drone and stolen credit cards.
Wow.
Not enough for like 300 years, though.
I don't know. It kind of sounds like a Netflix series.
There you go.
Nicole, I thought you made an excellent donkey, I should say.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Could you guys provide a little bit of insight to maybe aspiring security practitioners or writers about the process? Like start, it seems like it could, I've never written a book, but it seems like it could be anywhere from, 2 years to 5 years. There's a span, a time continuum that's all over, the map. What's kind of the process from beginning to end, and kind of walk through what some of the one thing I've learned from listening to a lot of you guys speak in podcasts and other areas is that it sounds like you don't do it for money. That's the one thing I learned for sure is that, it's a lot of work, when you turn out kind of the time, the time per hour that it takes to write these, incredible pieces. But give people a little bit of the insight into the process. Kevin, why don't you kick us off there?
Now, when we pass this to someone else, and I'll pick it up later.
Sure. Andy? Or Joseph? Yeah, go ahead.
I'll take it. Sure. So, the nice thing about all of our jobs is that we're looking for stories anyway. And a book is really different from a big story. Publishers, among other things, want like a third act, and in a lot of the journalism, you're trying to cause the third act. But nevertheless, it's great. It's a great way to mine what's going on in the industry for ideas and for sources and for characters. And so, I actually think I think it's really symbiotic. I don't want to be a full-time author. And I would be a little bummed to be just a reporter. I really like the day job, but they feed off each other. And so I'm not in a mad rush. I've got a really high standard for a book. I only write one like every 8 years or so because it's exhausting. To me, the most exhausting part of the process is actually the book proposal, because you're writing that on spec. And so that's a weekend and vacation type of project. And it's a genre that isn't like convertible into anything else, including the actual book. You're writing it for an agent, you're writing it for the head of the publishing house, and like a line editor, the person who's actually going to be trying to buy it and fix it. And my worst case, I wrote multiple proposals that did not become books. And the one that became my first book on security took years of rewriting and recasting. And it's like debilitating. I'd say the whole thing is like a person year for me. Each of my books has been a person year, but sometimes it's stretched out over more years. It's always more years than one, and sometimes it's like 4 or 5.
Wow. Anyone else want to share kind of their insight into the kind of writing to publishing process?
It helps a lot to have a forum to put something out, like in magazines, like some sort of long form outlet to get started in, that introduces you to the people that you need to talk to for an eventual book, gives you an idea of what the narrative looks like, and it helps with the pitch as well when it comes time to write one. if you could show that you have something out there already, and that there was interest in it. So that's an advantage. We saw that with Andy, like Andy described, with his Wired article leading to the Sandworm book.
You did a Wired piece about Max Vision, right?
Yeah, same thing. And that's kind of how that started. So that helps a lot. And there are a lot of outlets now where to do that kind of long form, without access to an old school print magazine. So if you can put something together there, that's a great place to start.
Great.
And I'll add that my
ahead.
process wasn't a process at all. It was a total mess. I wish I had taken that route where I wrote one long form story that became a book. Instead, I was approached by an agent, and I'd been approached about books before, but the last thing I wanted to do after covering nonstop hacking all day was go home at night and write about hacking. And I was approached by an agent, and when I Googled her, she represented a lot of the chefs at restaurants in San Francisco I could never get a reservation to. And so I thought, okay, well, she does cookbooks, and my husband is a chef, and maybe she'll want to, help publish his cookbook one day, and I'll go out to dinner with her, and I'll get to go to one of my favorite restaurants. And I showed up, and this is really the sign of a good agent. And I think this is probably my number one tip, is find a good agent. I showed up, and she had a whole dossier on me with articles I had written and possible protagonists and even chapter headings. And I left the dinner really with no choice but to commit to writing a book. And I sold it. And I committed to writing it in 9 months, which was a joke. And it was actually cruel. I can't believe that they had me sign something like that. It took me 7 years. The first publisher canceled on me because they were so sick of waiting for it. They didn't care that the shadow brokers had appeared on the scene and were dumping the NSA's exploits, or that NotPetya was happening. They just wanted the copy, and they just wanted to get it out. So they canceled on me, and I ended up having to resell the book in the middle of all of this to a publisher that gave me about half the advance that the original publisher had given me. But the guy there at Bloomsbury, Anton Mueller, really believed in the project. And that's the second thing I would say, is find an editor who truly believes in the project and will do anything to get you over the finish line. And, the third thing I would say is try and find your one donkey that can carry the narrative through, because I think it's a lot more helpful to have that one person than to be jumping around and figuring out the through line yourself. But those are my big tips. Wish I could say it was a clean process. It wasn't.
Has your original publisher been in touch now that your book is a bestseller, or have you been in touch with them in any DMs at least?
They emailed my agent the day it made the bestseller list and said, "Looks like we quit too early." So that was good. They didn't send it to me, but they sent it to my agent, and I'm probably going to frame it.
That's awesome. How about the gong show that was 2020 brought a lot of negative things. But, in journalism, it seems like there may be some positive things that came about it. I found that Twitter became such a noise, the signal noise ratio just went off the charts. So it felt like people were actually paying less attention to Twitter and more attention to long form content and podcasts and kind of more meaningful stuff. Any insights what you're seeing there? Any changes that you've witnessed and ways that you're publishing content that's been a little different since the pandemic? Anyone? Andy? Kevin?
Well, I guess when the pandemic began, I was finishing up this the longest feature I've ever written about Marcus Hutchins, the black hat turned white hats, but then treated like a black hat by the FBI and arrested after he had found the kill switch in WannaCry that, prevented this terrible worm spread around the world. You probably all know this Marcus Hutchins story, not from me, but just from being in the industry. But I was terrified that nobody wanted to read anything that wasn't about COVID-19 back in April of 2020. And then I think like exactly in May, just before this piece came out, it seemed like people just got bored of reading pandemic news and wanted to just read anything else. And it was just it worked out kind of perfectly that somehow, as you said, Dan, that like people just wanted almost more like escapist narrative, long form stories. And so that became like the most read thing I've ever written, I think, just because it was telling like a totally different kind of story and people just could get wrapped up in it. And, you know, they, at the same time that they were watching Tiger King, they like wanted just a good long drama to follow.
Anybody else seen any kind of meaningful differences?
Well, I do think that this sort of like the information overload thing on top of the pandemic sort of doom scrolling, you know, was a lot. And I think people were looking for longer explanatory stuff, or, you know, fun escapist stuff, or both. So yeah, I think it was actually a really good year for narrative nonfiction and for really good analysis of, you know, where COVID came from and what went wrong. And you know, I hope we're carrying that forward. I think we are. I mean, everything seems a little less hyper than it was through November. You know, I hope we emerge from this like less distracted and more able to focus on meaningful stuff. I mean, it seems like it's possible. It used to be impossible to get anything on TV that wasn't about Trump. Even if it's like some, you know, third-rate, you know, first-term congressman, you know, mouthing off, you know, from one side or another. It's like that's all anybody was talking about. And I think there's room for dialogue about more things now.
Great. So with SolarWinds and you know, I just saw the I think it's the CEO of SolarWinds, or the CISO of SolarWinds is doing the keynote at RSA this year. Supply chain you know, attacks seem to be very prominent, or it seems to have exposed something that I think we've known for quite some time, but at scale, much like Sony exposed, you know, a bunch of things. And, you know, some of these kind of watershed attacks open eyes to kind of what's possible. Are you guys seeing more interest in supply chain and kind of attacks that are a little more interesting around that, you know, in the news or through research or through some of your sources? Nicole, you're nodding your head, so I hope that's yes.
Well, you know, I was thinking about the last question too, about what everyone wanted to read in the pandemic. And on some level, we all became election reporters last year. And then it turned out that actually we were looking in the wrong place. And, you know, I was part of this group of reporters who were getting these briefings bi-hourly from DHS on election day. And it's just been stunning thinking back to that day and thinking back to Chris Krebs saying, you know, it's just another Tuesday on the internet, and even hearing from Chad Wolf, you know, backing up that claim. And now we know that at that very moment, we think Russian hackers were reading Chad Wolf's emails. You know, it just really gets to the fact that just when you think you have your hands around one thing, you're just thrown in a completely different direction. But on supply chain attacks, I mean, I think on some level, we all knew something like this was inevitable. And it was just amazing to call up the spokespeople at some of the victim agencies that didn't even know what SolarWinds was or that they were using it. And also amazing that the day it came out, you could just go to SolarWinds' website and see that it was used by more than 400 of the Fortune 400 and the Pentagon and the Department of Energy, et cetera, et cetera. But probably what's most interesting for us is, you know, if this is the SVR, like everyone seems to think it is, we know them from those hacks they pulled off in 2014, 2015 on the White House and the State Department. And what I remember from that attack is that people described getting them out of the systems like hand-to-hand digital combat. You know, just because they had been discovered in a hallway didn't mean they were going to go out the back door. They were in there to stay in there And I think at one point even took over the RSA Net Witness tool that was looking to identify more Russian backdoors. So the fact that they were in these systems for more than 9 months is a huge problem. And it'll be a long time, I think, before anyone can confidently say we found every last backdoor and compromised application. But I think the good news with SolarWinds is just that it leaves the new administration no choice but to deal with some of these things that we've talked about for years and years, like real-time threat sharing and possibly a bill of materials. And, I've just been impressed watching the latest Senate hearing to see the nuance in the questions for the first time. Like you usually watch these hearings wincing, but to see the level of awareness among lawmakers jump up from where it has been, I think was really impressive. This one is going to be very hard to unwind. And I think, unfortunately, it's going to dominate most of our lives for the next year, hopefully not longer.
Yeah, and are any of you seeing? So sorry, go ahead, Joseph.
I was just going to add that I agree. I agree with all of that. I think SolarWinds is really interesting, and I feel bad for SolarWinds because it's not just SolarWinds. There are vectors we don't know about yet. We know that Microsoft was abused. Their gear was abused pretty badly, and there are security companies. They were really after security companies to use that as a vector, which is, it's been a goal for a while, but to see it, this sophisticated an effort with this much success is, should be terrifying to people, particularly people in the space. I think supply chain is one of those big, ugly, nearly unfixable things, and it'll be interesting to see how they take a run at it. I think the draft executive order on cyber makes some interesting progress towards that. So agencies have to identify their most critical software, and they have to report. Vendors have to report when they're breached to their government customers. So we're going to find out a lot more hacking this way.
Great. How about what do we think? Any predictions for what are going to be the big stories over this next coming year here? Obviously, we've got supply chain. We've got a new government, in the U.S. here. Lots of change. Hopefully, we're on the good side of here of COVID. But any predictions on any, or what do you believe are going to be the big stories, or kind of the big theme that comes out from 2021?
I think ransomware is going to dominate in 2021. I think, had there not been a pandemic and an election, it would have dominated in 2020. It's something that kind of started off as a joke with like crypto locker and $100 ransom demands, and now they're getting $1 million at a pop, and they're crippling hospital networks and putting lives in danger. And the ransomware operations have they've reached a state of near perfection when it comes to criminal cyber activity. So I think we're going to see some serious damage done in a ransomware attack, it's going to be like huge amounts of money being lost over the next 9 months.
Yeah, I think there's even brokers now that will broker the payment of the ransom, which is something you never really expected. Anybody else? Any other themes? Oh, more of the same. Just a bit bigger, faster, better. Well, let's. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Joseph.
Ransomware is my number one pick for the story of the year. And there are all these great line extensions where they can rob you multiple times, first to unlock your stuff and then to stop, me from leaking it. That's going to be really bad. But there's, a number of real world conflicts that are heating up. China and the US are circling each other and around Taiwan and other issues. And, Russia's got troops right now, more troops on the border with Ukraine. So I think there's going to be more kinetic cyberkinetic stuff that causes real things to blow up. More pain.
Great. Well, believe it or not, we are out of time. Like any, at least from my perspective, like any good conversation, it seems to have gone a lot faster than I would have expected. The last time I was at RSA was, what was that, March, maybe late February of 2000, right before the pandemic. So it certainly was, I think that was the last event at Moscone, as a matter of fact. And we didn't really, I think, know what was about to happen. So here's hoping that next year we have the opportunity, whether it's in San Francisco or decided to be somewhere else, to do this in person and kind of get back to a little bit of a more interactive audience participation. But I'd like to thank you, Joseph, Andy, Kevin, and Nicole. Certainly be a pleasure to do this again. I'm super lucky to be able to do this and to track your progress has been amazing. Hopefully you all have new books in the works. And it sounds like Kevin's got something going on that he's not telling us. But I look forward to reading those just like your last ones. And thanks a lot for your time. Have a great time.
Thanks so much, Dan.
Thanks,
Next
Dan.
year, drinks.